In 1811, deep in the Blue Mountains of Jamaica, a man vanished into the forest, not because he was captured, not because he was killed, but because he made a choice that turned him from hunter to hunted in a single silent moment. For 30 days, he tracked a runaway woman through steep ridges, cold rivers, and dense green corridors where light barely touched the ground. He followed broken branches, studied faint impressions in wet clay, and knelt beside small circles of ash still warm beneath the soil. He was good at it. He had been trained to be. His name was Samuel Clark. He was black. He was enslaved. And he worked for the plantation militia. That was how he survived. Until survival demanded something different. Jamaica in 1811 was not simply an island of sugar fields and white beaches. It was one of the wealth engines of the British Empire, a place where plantations produced enormous wealth, while brutality remained locked inside the cane. The lowlands were carved into estates, each one a machine that converted forced labor into profit. But above those estates rose the Blue Mountains, steep and mist-wrapped, holding a different story. In those mountains lived the Maroons, communities of formerly enslaved Africans who had fought the British decades earlier and secured treaties that allowed them to live with a degree of autonomy. They farmed small plots, defended narrow passes, and guarded their independence fiercely. To the plantation owners, the mountains were a threat. Every enslaved person who reached them represented not only lost labor, but a living symbol that escape was possible. And just a few years earlier, the revolution in Haiti had proved that plantations were not invincible. The fear of rebellion hung heavy over Jamaica. That fear required enforcement, and enforcement required men like Samuel Clark. Samuel had not been born into privilege. He had been born into the fields. His earliest memories filled with the rhythm of cane knives slicing through stalks and the weight of harvested bundles pressing against his shoulders. He remembered the sting of sunburn on raw skin and the silence that followed the crack of a whip. But he was observant, strong, quick to understand patterns. The overseer noticed. Instead of cutting cane year after year, Samuel was gradually reassigned. First, he carried messages between estates. Then he guarded storehouses. Eventually, he was handed a musket and placed among the plantation slave catchers. He was still enslaved. That fact did not change. But he was now useful in a different way. Usefulness meant marginal protection. It meant slightly better rations. It meant fewer lashes. In a brutal system, usefulness could mean survival. When someone ran, Samuel was sent after them. He learned to read the forest the way other men read books. He studied how desperation shaped footprints. He understood that most runaways moved fast at first, then slowed as hunger and fatigue set in. He recognized how rain distorted tracks and how broken fern stems leaned differently depending on direction of travel. He did not enjoy the work, but he hardened himself. He told himself he had no choice. If he refused, he would be whipped. If he resisted, he would be chained beside the one he failed to capture. Survival demanded compartments, and Samuel built them carefully, sealing away guilt behind logic. Then Abina ran. She did not run in panic. She did not scream or fight when her younger brother was sold to another parish without warning. She watched him loaded onto a cart at dawn, his hands bound, his eyes wide with confusion. She did not break in public. She memorized patrol routines. She observed which guards drank heavily on certain nights. She waited for a storm strong enough to wash away footprints. When it came, she moved. She carried dried cassava wrapped in cloth and a small knife tucked at her waist. She did not head downhill where roads made pursuit easier. She climbed toward the mountains. She was not running to hide temporarily. She was running toward the Maroons, toward a rumor of freedom. When her absence was discovered, the plantation owner reacted quickly. Escape could not be allowed to become inspiration. Orders were delivered with cold precision. She was likely heading north. She must be brought back alive. Alive meant punishment. Alive meant a public reminder of consequences. Samuel stood before the overseer and accepted the musket without argument. Outwardly, nothing in him shifted. Inwardly, something small and restless began to stir. The Blue Mountains do not surrender easily. The slopes shift unpredictably. Mist can erase visibility in minutes. Samuel tracked her patiently. A snapped twig here, a shallow heel imprint in clay there, a faint smell of smoke clinging to damp air. Abina was careful. She doubled back occasionally. She walked through streams when she could. She buried ashes under soil. Days passed, then weeks. Hunger thinned her, but she did not falter. Samuel felt the distance narrowing, and with it came a tightening in his chest that he could not fully name. On the 23rd day, he found her near a riverbank at dusk. She was kneeling by the water, filling a small gourd. Dirt streaked her arms. Her frame looked lighter than before, but her posture remained upright. She sensed him before he fully stepped into view. Their eyes met across the clearing. The forest seemed to pause. Samuel could have raised a musket higher. He could have fired into the air to signal success. He could have closed the distance in seconds. Instead, he stood still. She spoke first, her voice calm. She told him he knew what they would do to her. He did. He had seen it before. Whips, salt and wounds, public humiliation. He replied that she knew what they would do to him if he returned empty-handed. That was true as well. He would lose his position, lose his thin layer of protection, possibly suffer the same punishment he had once helped administer. They both understood the stakes without elaboration. He asked where she was going. She said she was heading to people who lived free. The word free hung in the air, heavy and fragile. She told him he could come. He almost laughed, the idea sounding impossible, reckless. But she was not joking. She did not plead or beg. She simply turned and began walking deeper into the forest. Samuel stood there with a musket in his hands, feeling his weight differently than before. Behind him lay predictable survival. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, perhaps death, but also the possibility of something he had never allowed himself to imagine fully. He lowered the weapon and followed. When Samuel did not return, suspicion spread quickly. The plantation assumed he had been ambushed or killed. Search parties were organized. Dogs were brought in. Notices offering rewards were posted in nearby parishes. Samuel and Abina moved mostly at night. They drank from streams and slept beneath dense foliage. Samuel showed her how patrols typically fan out across ridges. He explained how dogs were often released near known water sources. She listened carefully. In return, she pointed out subtle markers that suggested Maroon routes he had never noticed during his years of tracking. They began to operate not as hunter and prey, but as partners navigating a shared threat. Days of shared hunger and shared vigilance blurred the boundary between necessity and attachment. Their conversations were quiet and practical at first, centered on routes and risks. Gradually, they spoke of things rarely voiced aloud. She told him about her brother and the memory of his hand slipping from hers. He admitted that every time he returned to Runaway, a part of him felt diminished, even if he refused to name it. The forest forced honesty. There were no overseers in the trees, no plantation rules echoing through the leaves. Only choices. Gunfire echoed once in the distance, close enough to remind them that pursuit was real. They hid beneath thick brush while voices passed nearby. Samuel's heart pounded as he listened to men who had once been his colleagues search for him as a traitor. In that moment, there was no turning back. If captured, he would not be spared. His usefulness had evaporated the moment he chose not to fire. After days of climbing, they reached the outer edge of a Maroon settlement. Armed guards emerged silently, weapons raised. The Maroons did not trust strangers, especially not a man who carried himself like a former tracker. Abina spoke before suspicion hardened. She explained what Samuel had done. She told him he had lowered his weapon. The Maroon captain studied Samuel with measured intensity. He asked if Samuel had hunted their people before. Samuel answered yes. He asked why he had stopped. Samuel did not offer a speech. He said simply that he was done hunting. Silence followed. Finally, the captain stepped aside. Life among the Maroons was not simple freedom. It was disciplined, cautious, and demanding. They farmed small plots and maintained constant readiness for raids. Trust was earned slowly. Samuel offered what knowledge he had, teaching them how plantation patrols read terrain and how slave catchers interpreted tracks. He transformed skills once used for capture into tools of defense. Abina worked beside him, tending crops and learning to fire a musket. Their bond deepened not through dramatic declarations, but through shared labor and shared watch shifts in the dark. The plantation declared Samuel a traitor. Rewards increased. Patrols intensified near known mountain passes. Once, soldiers came dangerously close to the settlement. Shots were fired. Smoke drifted across ridges. Samuel and Abina crouched beneath dense foliage, listening to boots crunch through leaves just yards away. Every close call reminded them that freedom was not safety. It was responsibility. It required vigilance. It demanded commitment. Years passed. Samuel's name faded from plantation records, replaced by new trackers trained to fill the void he left behind. But in the mountains, his story lingered quietly. He had been a man positioned between two worlds, surviving by serving power until he encountered someone who refused to survive that way. Love in their story was not a soft escape. It was a line crossed without witnesses. It was a weapon lowered. It was a refusal to continue being shaped by a system designed to divide. In 1811 Jamaica, that decision could cost a life. For Samuel Clark, it cost the only life he had known and gave him one he had never believed possible.